Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Cyber Resilience Brief, a SafeBreach podcast. I'm your host, Tova Dvorin, and joining me, as always, is our one and only Adrian Culley, our co-host, our resident offensive cybersecurity and sales engineer from Europe and the UK. Adrian, we're always happy to have you back.
Thanks, Tyra. It's always a pleasure. We've got a lot to unpack again today, so let's get right into it.
Okay, sounds great. Today we're talking about something that's really shaking up the European cyber landscape and has been shaking it up for a few years now. We're talking about the TIBER-EU framework. So, for our listeners, particularly those in North America who might not be familiar with the entire world of EU regulations, can you give us some background of what TIBER-EU is, how it relates to the current regulations with DORA and the EU Cyber Resilience Act, and why it's such a big deal for all of our customers across the pond?
Absolutely. So, TIBER-EU is an acronym. It stands for Threat Intelligence-Based Ethical Red Teaming. It's a framework developed by the European Central Bank, the ECB, and a number of national central banks. So, for American listeners, that's akin to the Federal Reserves for countries outside of USA. But in Europe, we call them national central banks, not Federal Reserves. Its main goal is to standardize and harmonize the way that financial entities and critical infrastructures across the EU conduct intelligence-led red team tests. And in February this year, TIBER had a major update. It now actually fully embraces the Digital Operational Resilience Act DORA principles. TIBER complements DORA, and DORA complements and embraces TIBER. Unlike traditional penetration testing that might focus on a narrow scope, TIBER-EU is a comprehensive exercise. It's designed to mimic the tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, of real-world sophisticated threat actors. The test is a full-blown simulation. It's not a desktop executive paper exercise. It's full-blown simulation that focuses on the organization's critical functions. That's the people, process, and technology to see how they would stand up to a persistent and targeted cyber attack.
You know, a holistic view of the attack landscape and one's resilience seems to be the name of the game, no matter what we talk about in this podcast. And I'm seeing it again here. Here, we're getting the comprehensive view just the way that now we redefined the entire BAS space to AAV, but we'll get to that.
Precisely. The idea, Tova, isn't just to get a pass or a fail grade in a test. The real value in the learning effect and the insights gained. It's about uncovering weaknesses in detection and response capabilities and then using that information, very critical here, to build a stronger defense. It's the very heart of what being intelligence-led is.
That is a fantastic overview of TIBER, Adrian. Let's pivot now to how this framework impacts some of the tools and methodologies that we talk about so often on this podcast. And let's start with our good friend BAS breach and attack simulation. Where do we see TIBER-EU influence BAS?
That's a great question, Tova. TIBER-EU raises the bar for security validation. While a BAS platform is phenomenal for continuously testing security controls and validating your defenses at scale, a full TIBER-EU engagement is a much more intensive one-time exercise. Think of it like this. Our BAS platform is your daily workout routine. We've talked about this before with the analogy with boxing and the movie Rocky. It ensures your core muscles, your security controls, are strong and performing correctly day in and day out. It's automated and scalable, and it gives you a constant real-time pulse on your security posture, which is, as we previously discussed, is dynamic and not static. But a TIBER-EU test? That's like completing an Ironman triathlon. It's a dedicated, intelligence-driven and highly customized event that tests your endurance and your ability to perform under extreme pressure.
Okay, so you're saying that they're complementary instead of competing.
Exactly. Many organizations are now using BAS platforms such as SafeBreach to prepare for a TIBER-EU test. They can use the automation and continuous validation of a BAS platform to identify and remediate basic and advanced security gaps before the red team ever sets foot in the virtual door. In fact, if you really recommend that you use a BAS platform, a CART platform, because you're making the red team then, the penetration testers, really work for their money. This ensures that when the TIBER-EU test begins, the organisation is focused on the more complex real-world adversary TTPs, the difficult things, rather than getting tripped up by easy low-hanging fruit.
That makes perfect sense. And, going back to that holistic view that we were speaking about before, what about adversary exposure validation? Where does that fit into the TIBER-EU landscape?
So this is where it gets really interesting. AEV is a more modern, proactive approach that focuses on a different aspect of the attack chain. Instead of just simulating an attack, AEV works to actively discover and validate your organization's exposure from an adversary's perspective. It answers the question, where can an attacker get in and what can they do once they're there? What we refer to as blast radius and blast fallout.
And can you expand on that concept of blast radius and blast fallout? What does that mean in this context?
That's a great question, Tova. We've stolen those terms from the Los Alamos Manhattan Project and nuclear testing. Blast radius is basically how far, if we pick a single machine, a single point of compromise as the zero patient, how far can an attacker get inside our network? Blast radius. Blast fallout is how much damage can they do?
And of course, to propagate SafeBreach's APV/CART tool, we are able to see exactly what all the implications of that are, no matter how big your network is.
Absolutely, Tova, and quickly and easily. And we can also, at whim, move who the zero patient is. We can approach that from a risk basis, from a risk appetite basis, from a role basis, from a exposure basis. They're all equally valid, and we can decide if a particular asset becomes the zero patient. We use that, but then we find out for real what actually happens if they're compromised. Apex cybersecurity.
I like that. Apex cybersecurity. That way, instead of us working the small David against the Goliath of the Apex hacker organization, the many against the few, we now have tools that even up the score a bit.
And that's the whole point of bleeding edge, obviously, exposure validation platform. They're constantly scanning and analyzing your external and internal attack surface to find exploitable weaknesses, often before a vulnerability is even widely known. And just highlight there and remind you all that SafeBreach are fairly unique in the market. We actually originate exploitable weaknesses. We don't sell them morally ethically. We disclose them, work with the manufacturer, vendor involved, and then reveal what's known when it's safe to do so. It's a continuous automated process that provides an adversarial view of your security posture. Now, with TIBER-EU, the initial phase involves a deep dive into threat intelligence to identify the most relevant and dangerous threat actors for a particular organization, something very much SafeBreach assists our partners with every day of the week. This is where adversary exposure validation can be a game changer. An AEV platform can provide the reconnaissance and intelligence gathering that's a mandatory part of the TIBER-EU framework. It helps the threat intelligence provider and the reg team understand the target's unique threat landscape and potential entry points with unprecedented accuracy and speed.
Growth. So, speaking of red teaming, let's talk about something I mentioned before, which is CART, continuous automated red teaming. This is a topic that's near and dear to our heart here at SafeBreach. It's really the vision that we're fulfilling with Validate and Propagate, and it's really the cutting edge right now for larger enterprises of where they need to be looking in terms of adversary simulation and thinking like an attacker. So, how does TIBER-EU influence the adoption and evolution of CART, which is still in its infancy?
So the CART is really the natural evolution of what we've been discussing. It takes the best of BAS and AEV and combines them with the strategic full kill chain approach of a red team engagement. The key here is the word continuous, which we will often discuss in terms of NIS2, DORA, and the Cyber Resilience Act. A traditional TIBER-EU test, while incredibly valuable, is still a point-in-time exercise. It can take months to prepare for and execute, and the threat landscape can change and will change dramatically in that time.
So, as we've discussed in our penetration testing episode, no matter how thorough you do a one off test, it can't provide continuous assurance.
No, I mean, we've just seen today a brand new Apple device 0 day around an image that can be uploaded. The attackers never sleep, and nor should your CART, AV, and BAS response. The TIBER-EU framework recognises this and encourages a continuous cycle of improvement. This is where CART solutions shine. They can automate the core TTPs of a red team operation, running them constantly to ensure that your defences are always tuned and ready. A CART platform can validate that the remediation actions taken after a TIBER-EU test are still effective and haven't been undone by a new configuration or a software update. In a way, CART provides the always-on red team, but complements the structured intelligence-led and regulator-mandated TIBER-EU framework. It's the engine that keeps the learning and validation cycle spinning long after the formal TIBER-EU engagement is complete.
Wow, very exciting to see these things come to life and to see where things are evolving. It's clear that rather than being in opposition, it's regulations like the TIBER-EU framework that are all pieces of a larger puzzle to secure enterprises. And, not that I should take sides, but perhaps our North American cousins should take a look at some of these regulations to see how we can get cyber resilience worldwide, using this as a model.
Yeah, we're seeing around the world, Tova, these regulations have a reputation for being onerous and cumbersome and ivory tower. There's actually sound cybersecurity principles in DORA, TIBER-EU, NIS2, the Cyber Resilience Act. In a nutshell, TIBER-EU is forcing organisations around the world to think about cyber resilience in a more structured, threat-informed way. And it's the automation and continuous validation that will allow them to actually build and maintain that resilience in a world where the threats are constantly evolving.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Adrian, thank you so much for breaking all of this down for us today. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning into the Cyber Resilience Brief. Stay safe with SafeBreach. See you next time. The Cyber Resilience Brief is a SafeBreach podcast. Executive produced by Tova Dvorin and Adrian Culley. Sound provided by Adobe Music. Editing done with Adobe Podcasts. Distribution and tracking provided by Podbean. If you enjoy the podcast and like to learn more, please check us out at www.safebreach.com. SafeBreach.com. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.